as you know, we've been talking a lot. We've been talking about all the Republican efforts and everything with book banning and basically all the censorship and everything they've been doing to prevent information and access to literally anything that's the truth, from schools, from libraries, under pretenses. And I wanted to give you the opportunity to hear from that directly from Frederick Joseph, my guy. He is a New York Times bestseller. He has several books, my favorite of which that is out now, Patriarchy Blues. I sing its praises to everybody and their mama because I personally love it. He is brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I'm going to let him properly introduce you to himself, to all the work that he does as an advocate, as a writer, as a speaker, as all of the things, and also let him directly tell you what it is to be somebody who is getting their books banned, which I have told him is iconic, and nobody would be able to tell me nothing personally if my books were being banned. So, Fred.
Hey, I appreciate it. I don't know about brilliant. I'm just a guy who just talks shit and looks at things, you know what I mean, and talk shit about the things I see. But realistically, as much as I think having your book banned is a badge of honor to a certain extent, right? Because it says that you're saying the right things, right? You're combating white supremacy, combating patriarchal structures, homophobia, transphobia, et cetera, et cetera. The reality of it is, especially as a Black author specifically, only 6% of published authors are Black in the first place, right? So like when your books are being banned, it's not like everyone whose books are banned suddenly becomes like an international best-selling author, right? You're not suddenly becoming transphobe J.K. Rowling, level of like success or whatever. So ultimately, it's a huge punishment, and it does like actually set us up for the complete erasure of like Black stories and Black perspectives really being out there, and not just Black, just marginalized people in general, but for the most part, they are Black.
I think, like you said, and I think you actually brought this to my attention when I responded to you, and I was like, Fred, this is iconic. And you were like, yeah, it would be better if it weren't affecting my book sales, if it were doing something to improve book sales. And I think I realized that I think what happens is, especially on Twitter and in certain spaces, you see these viral tweets of the books that are getting banned, and people have this reception or this response like, oh, well, that's going to make the sales on that spike. And so I think people are like dismissive or diminish, myself included, I think can underappreciate like the significance of what that's doing, right? It's not always the viral tweet you're seeing does not mean that everybody just went out across the country and purchased these books to combat the suppression of these books. So I guess for as someone who's impacted by that, Fred, what do you think we could better be doing around this to push back?
Well, I think that people have to stop, thinking that it helps all the time, right? I'm looking at some of the comments right now, and someone just said, oh, well, James Baldwin is more popular now than ever. Like, yeah, but also James Baldwin is dead, right? So like, I don't want to be a martyr when I'm in the grave. Like, oh my God, that guy who just murdered, or that guy who just died, that Black guy, he had some books. They were all banned. We should read them. Like, no, I want you to read my books while I'm here, right? I want my flowers while I'm still alive. And I think that everybody kind of feels the same way. Even more important than that, though, is the fact that there are over, I think it was something like 900 books on the banned list in Texas alone, right? Wow. You're not reading all those books.
Yeah.
Right? It's not like every one of those authors is James Baldwin or Ibram Kendi or something like that. Right. Like the reality of it is there are about 10 books that are getting a lot of notoriety around being banned, right?
Yeah.
And that's it, right? It was interesting. There was a post on TikTok recently. Book talk is really, really racist. And there was a post on TikTok where some young white woman made a post about her older white dad and how his book had never sold. I don't know if any.
Oh, I saw that, and they all went out and bought that. I saw that as well.
His book it became the number one book in the world, not like the number one book like for a day on Amazon, like the number one book sales wise in the world, right?
Yeah.
And it's not because he's some like writer who's trying to change the world or because his books are being banned. He wrote a thriller, like some one of those thriller books.
Fiction.
It was a fictional book. It was a thriller. A few years back, but he's also an attorney and they live in a massive house and he's an old white man. Why would that be the effort that books
sympathy
behind, right? because as opposed to saying like, hey, there's a book by a black trans woman that's being banned everywhere. Why don't we make sure that is, this massive selling book? That it just so again, I just think people need to
Yeah.
rethink the effort and what actually happens with book bans and book support.
I think that really, speaks to privilege and who people think are supposed to be heard, right? Because for you to, like you said, there are about 6% of authors of all published books are Black. So you already, how often are people even reading Black books? Like I posted on a video of Toni Morrison the other day, and my followers were like, oh, who's this great thinker I've never heard of? I'm like, because they're not even getting access to or privy to our greats, because we're not put on the curriculum as the classics. And this one, you might get a couple of Maya Angelou book that breaks through, but yet, they see some white girl tell you, oh, my daddy's book didn't sell. And it's like, oh my God. Oh my God, they didn't read your daddy's story. that's so important that your daddy be heard. Let's rectify this at once.
But that's exactly it, right? Like, and I'm even saying this, as a cis het Black dude who's, I'm not like the most oppressed person in society. Like, I can only imagine what is happening to, like, again, the trans Black woman who can't even get like just Black cis people to read her book, right? And so when we see these bans happening, you legitimately are going to have a generation that already wasn't invested in Black and brown stories, now not even being able to access them when they do want to invest in them. It's bananas.
Someone asked in the audience, they said, what is the name of your books that are being banned? And I think that is a beautiful opportunity for you to tell people about your books.
Yeah, I appreciate that. So the first book, The Black Friend on Being a Better White Person, that is a young adult book. So it's primarily being banned in schools. It's been banned in every school in Mississippi. It's been banned in most schools in Texas, and now most schools in Florida. And then my second book that came out, Patriarchy Blues, the one that I deeply appreciate how much support has been given to that book. That's actually being banned in prisons around the country right now. And that's
what?
Yeah. So that's a new thing that people aren't talking about enough. So books that are aiming to strategically and thoughtfully help make people in prison, and it's primarily like men in prison, better, right? By like deconstructing and considering why they are violent, why they might be toxically masculine, why they might be womanizers, so on and so forth. They're banning those books because, I mean, we all get it. Like I've seen what y'all talk about, right? Like at the end of the day, these institutions benefit from keeping these people toxic so that they either stay in the system or come back to the system, because at the end of the day, the system keeps their pockets lined. So they're banning the books like mine that aim to make these people never end up in this system again.
Absolutely. I'd realized that because we're in the process of trying to send books to Rikers, and patriarchy, I'm always recommending this book. So I ran up against that, but we just figured out a way to get around it. And it's that I think we can submit them. We can do this thing through the public libraries. I'm going to figure out how we can circumvent this with a lot of the prisons and see if we can put that information out as far as the books and what's happening with that. Because, Patriarchy Blues I've recommended that to so many men, it's unreal. And, I'll send you sometimes how many times they message me like, that was the most thoughtful book, or that made me cry for real. I'm like, it really is a very, very, very meaningful read. So iconic still, but I'm very sick about it for you, Fred.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. So sorry, I'm looking at the comments as people are talking. Somebody asked if by the system I mean capitalism. I mean, like, yes, capitalism, but the system is also whiteness, right? This, like, all these systems that fall under capitalism. So it's not just I talk about this in Patriarchy Blues, actually, right? It's like capitalism, white supremacy, patriarchy, right? So like I think oftentimes, especially in leftist spaces, people like do this thing where everyone wants to be a pseudo Karl Marx and solely talk about capitalism as this like grand lofty ideal. And I'm like, yeah, but you can't talk about capitalism and use it as like this conceptual word without very specifically talking about white supremacist capitalism, patriarchal capitalism, right? So on and so forth.
Yes, absolutely. Oh, you have another book Fred, you got so many books. We stopped you before you with your most recent books. You're still going. You got to keep going.
Yeah. I actually the reason I look like crap, I just jumped on here. I'm on a writing deadline. I'm in the process of finishing up a novel right now and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Let me make sure I get these comments, because I see people are very excited in the comments to have you, and they are moving. So let me make sure I get the questions. I think, what have you found to be, I think I really want to know this. What has been the most like surprising thing? Like when the first time you realized one of your books was being banned, or when that happened, what was that reaction for you?
I didn't really know what it meant, right? Like you hear about like a book being banned in passing, and just like, okay, that sucks. It's a school. But then I think I really started taking note when they started getting angry, right? I started getting death threats over my books. And I remember one specific thing that happened. A young white girl took my book out. It's actually in upstate New York. And I think, again, we have to stop like framing the country through like states, like blue states, red states. No, like the whole country is a white supremacist country. But
yes,
but nonetheless, a young white girl taking my book out in upstate New York. Her father found out and like refused to give the book back to the library so no other white kids could read it. Right. And then when that made news in press that had happened, I got like 20 death threats that week. Right. Like over a young adult's book. So, that's when I really realized, oh, this is some shit.
That is, have you felt like, because I know I've had this experience, I was explaining to people as someone on like TV media, I feel like the written world is harder to get into, to say the things that we're saying now, right? Because by the time you say it in media, you've said it, they don't know what you're going to say, and it comes out. But I find that it's much harder. Like it takes me a much longer time to say 1/16 at a time by the time the editors and the people that are standing in your way. Have you found that experience, and has it gotten tougher, do you think, harder or easier with all the national attention and the book bannings?
I mean, I'll keep it all the way real. Keep it very much how you be keeping it on these things, right? Like because of like the book bans, and I think just the national conversation or lack thereof around certain things, I like low-key regret coming out with the books that I've come out with and like writing them in certain ways, right? So you take a book like Patriarchy Blues, it's not what, like at the end of the day, most of my followers, right? Like the fucking hundreds of thousands of people that follow me, of that, hundreds of thousands of them are white women, and white women are not like, and a lot of the readership that like these publishers try to attract are white women, quite frankly, right?
Yeah.
And so Patriarchy Blues, as an example, has not sold well because of how I wrote the book and how honest I was in the book, because the book is not solely, I think somebody in the comments had asked how important it is, how important is it to kind of identify your white privilege. And I talk about that in the book, right? Like, you can't talk about patriarchy without talking about whiteness. You can't talk about patriarchy without talking about it being upheld by like toxic white feminism and the history of toxic white feminism, how feminism as a contemporary movement came out of racism from Black people getting rights and so on and so forth. So all that to say, it deeply affects the writing, because you feel like you have to write different to pay your bills.
Yeah. Toni Morrison talked about that a lot, right? Because she was like, she never liked authors or Black writers who she felt like they were talking past, or they were talking to white audiences, and she wanted to write where she was having these conversations directly with her Black readers. And that's exactly how Patriarchy Blues is. Patriarchy Blues feels like you are sitting there, I am reading your journal, and we are having like a really deep, intimate conversation. And I guess it's hard because, like you said, you don't want to be, we know these greats and we appreciate them in our community. Like we know Zora Neale Hurston, we know that's one of the most prolific writers of our time. And Zora Neale Hurston was penniless most of her entire life. And so you don't want that to be you, because it shouldn't have to be, modern day, struggling, and poverty should not be a reflection of how well our product is. But do you think, I ask you this, if you could go back in time before, as you were writing, as you sat down to write Patriarchy Blues, would you write it differently? Would you write it writing past and to the white audience, the white women?
I mean, nah, like, that's not saying, right?
I knew it.
Like, I was going to ask if there could be like an entry level one for fragility levels, it's like, this is the primer.
There's a funny thing about that, like the entry level for fragility is like, no matter what a black person says, like white people are fragile about it, right? So it doesn't ultimately matter. I could have literally been
It's
like,
true.
I could like even like just as an example, like my most recent book is a picture book for Black Panther 2. And when I was in Florida promoting the book, someone came into where I was, opened it up, closed it, and they were like, I just wanted to make sure it wasn't CRT. It's a fucking picture book for Black Panther 2, for the most capitalist company, the most like it's Disney. What do you think Disney's going to let me put? What do you think I'm going to be in there talking about? You think I wrote a Black Panther book in which a kid opens it and it says every white person is a heathen? What do you think?
I'm curious, Fred, long-term wise, where do you think this is going to lead? Because book bans are not a new phenomenon, obviously, in the United States. Do you think that this is just like another wave of many, or do you think that this is one portion of a bigger move towards fascism? Because, this comes in tandem with, other types of bans, the Don't Say Gay law in Florida. There's a bunch of proposals. I don't know how many will pass in Florida in particular, like banning the Democratic Party, for example. Like, long term, where do you think this is going to lead? Is it eventually going to get better, or are we kind of just headed towards the cliff, like in your opinion?
I mean, I think that you hit the nail on the head with the word fascism, right? Anyone who understands history knows that it always starts with banning of ideologies. It always starts with banning of perspective, right? Like I have said, and people think that I'm exaggerating this. I'm like, Ron DeSantis, as an example, right, as one of the premier faces of the Republican Party, and quite frankly, the premier face of politics in this nation, because the Biden administration really doesn't have any moral fortitude to do anything that's necessary right now, or say the things that are necessary about any things that are happening. So Ron DeSantis basically is the president at this moment. And from my perspective, this is just the beginning, right? Because like you mentioned, the bills against identities in Florida. You mentioned certain other bills. I mean, just on a baseline, it is about to become, or it might have been passed already, a felony to teach certain things in schools in Florida, right? And this is a testing ground. This is not like, oh my God, well, let's just, that stupid meme where it's like cutting Florida off of the United States. I'm like, no, Florida is the United States. Florida is going to become the United States. You have someone who shares many of the same ideologies as the governor of Florida as mayor of what is supposed to be one of the two most liberal cities in this country, in New York City, right? We have a police state in New York City. We have book bans, ideology and identity bans in Florida. You got book bans and the same nonsense in Texas. We are plunging quickly into becoming a neo-fascist state.
Yeah, well said. That's what scares me, because there's been a lot of media coverage about the book bans, but I feel like normie people, for lack of a better word, they don't understand the severity of this. They don't understand that having to get books approved to be in school libraries, that is serious. Like, this is pre-Nazi Germany shit that people just kind of don't think about. They just see another article or a headline and they say, oh, well, that's DeSantis, I hate him, and then they go on with their day. They don't understand that, like, what we're seeing is the DeSantification of the GOP, where other states are replicating that. We see other countries and far-right parties in control emulating Donald Trump, Ron DeSantis. And so, like, we're seeing, like, the emergence of an international fascist movement, and we're all kind of just, like, sitting on our hands saying, man, that sure is disappointing. I hate Ron DeSantis. Vote him out next time. I don't think people are taking this seriously.
No, they're sorry, you were gonna say something?
No,
go for it.
No, I was gonna say no. They're not taking it seriously, and I mentioned the Biden administration, and I do blame a great deal of this on them. And I know a lot of like liberals wouldn't want to hear that, but the reality of it is that any presidential administration kind of sets the tone of its base, right? Yeah. And the tone of its base and the most active people, for the most part, are like Black and brown people, obviously coming out to vote, but the people who have privilege, money, access, resources are these like suburban white moms, right? Like these white families, and they haven't kind of like been given marching orders from the administration to say like, hey, these are the things happening right now, and these are the things we need to be combating, right? The reason why you're having what you're having on a hyper local level is like Moms for Liberty, as an example, right? Moms for Liberty saw like, hey, there is a gap that we can fill on school boards, local elections like city council, so on and so forth, and things of that nature. So we're going to fill that gap strategically over the next few years, and they have done so very successfully. And there's not countermeasures that are being like kind of passed down, trickled down from the top, right? And you know, again, I know this for some people probably sounds like a lot, but you're right. We right now are in this moment that is like what they were in right before Nazi Germany. Like, it's not an exaggeration, and I don't think that people get that. They have like voting patrols, like militias in Florida going around and like arresting people who supposedly weren't supposed to vote, who thought that they could legally vote, right? Like, I don't think people get it.
I think that's the double-edged sword with or being a marginalized group, right? Is like, if they're already the mainstream, the status quo that we exist in is the fact that they already barely see Black authors, they already barely see trans authors, they already barely see these things. They're kept in the mainstream, so they can't even feel for real. They don't feel the squeeze of those things being completely removed from the space because they were never really interacting with it, so they can't feel the weight of that loss. You know what I mean? Or the what that impact is, right? Like, they can't feel what the very few amount of Black authors that have been able to get into a space. The fact that you name, everyone knows James Baldwin because his quotes are everywhere, and they don't get what that means and how hard it was, and the significant impact and the loss of even that limited bit of representation, or what could be if you were actually had more access to this on a much larger scale. And it's unfortunate. That's how it hurts you twice, right? You're already the marginalized group, and because you're already marginalized, no one felt it. They're not up on arms, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly it. And, you know, I don't know what kind of time y'all be on here, but I just saw somebody say that we need militias of our own and things like that. You know, I want to that. I don't want y'all to get like in trouble or anything like that. I don't know what kind of time y'all be on about certain things, but I'm just say like this, you know, everybody gotta do don't come knocking at my door. You got the not over there, not on this side.
Hey, it's my favorite clip online where it's like they're showing them and they're like, I'm not gonna lie, it concerns me a little bit, but I stay strapped too. Come around here, you will get clapped.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, like, if we keep it all the way a buck for a second, you got me after 9 o'clock at night, so I'm gonna just you don't have the more whatever, but if we keeping it all the way a buck, you know, even with like the insurrection, like I feel like all of us were online as that was happening, like shoot them.
Hey, I have said on this show that I would have let the chopper sing. I said I don't let the chopper sing.
If Biden, let's say Biden was inaugurated by that time, and I don't really care about him, but if let's say they was like, hey, legally anybody who voted for a Democrat or something can go down there and let that thing let off, right? I'm like, ooh, I played bad Call of Duty back in the day. Let's get it. You know? Like, and I think the things like that, if man, like, I think that one woman got killed, right? She got like shot, you know, we're charging in, and she got shot in the head immediately, whatever. But like, if man wait, that's one of my favorite moments ever in history. But I was going to say, oh God. Anyway, I was gonna say, you know, if we would have watched like a bloodbath that day, like the insurrection, I promise you, all these people who were going up to like, like the days where they're like, I forget what they're called, like the trans women who were like reading the kids and things like that, and like all the Proud Boys, you would see nary a Proud Boy running around the streets as they are right now if they would have saw 90 of them get their heads blown off at the insurrection.
No facts. You know what I would have done? Theoretically, this is why I let the record reflect. I don't have any intentions of getting into politics. I know what kind of people should be leaders, and it shouldn't be me. But if it were me and they stormed the Capitol, I'd have cut the lights. Like I'd have cut all the cameras. No journalists, no nothing. No one would have known. And no one was not going to be reported to the nation. The only report you would have heard that there was a convoy headed to the Capitol and storming. Then you would have heard nothing, and they'd have just never returned to their families. Nothing. I'd say nothing. They'd just disappear. I would just disappear every trace of the government. Nothing. And then they would all just be there like conspiracy, searching for your loved ones.
That would have
never come. Like,
I would have like built like an entire apparatus around them very quickly and turned the whole bitch into Hunger Games very quickly. like everybody who was at the insurrection, I would have built mad walls, like maybe like 10 blocks away. Everybody who was cool, like, oh, you cool, you leave, and like thousands of them would have just been in the Hunger Games, like all of a sudden.
No, 100%. Listen. Y'all don't know the kind of leadership I'd be on. Listen, every time I told my friend once what I'd give it up if I had true powership, and he was like, if you ever even look too close to power, I love you and I'm gonna take you out the game. And I was like, yeah, it's crazy how you don't want to see me do what I need to do to get us to the promised land. Joking, kidding, US government. I support you in all your choices.
May I?
Am
I allowed to respond to something?
Yes.
Like, I'm just reading the comments, and I just find it really interesting. So there's this respectability and this like tone policing that I'm just like kind of watching happening in the comments, right? Like people like, if you condone violence and the things you're saying, and I'm like, as a Black person, there's no one except for maybe people who are indigenous to this land have received more violence in this nation, right? Like even like your comments right now that you're making are actually emotional and mental violence towards Black people who are actively talking about white supremacists who tried to overthrow the country in the name of like being able to murder
violently.
Yeah, like overthrow the U.S. government.
Right? Like
they only start talking about that once they're talking to Black people. That's my very first piece on iilluminaughtii is called America's Hypocrisy on Violence, the Case of Police Brutality. America loves violence. America has been at war for most of the country's history. They love violence. They love military, guns, weapons, all of this. There is nothing else. There is nothing that white people face or anything that the immediate response isn't violence. The minute Ukrainian citizens took up arms in their yards, everyone was like, whoa! Yes, clapping on for that on Twitter. You understand that in every context. But the minute if we're talking about Black people, all of a sudden, or how you handle things is, oh, we are so against violence. No. Not like that. Peaceful.
I mean, that's 1,000%. And I think that the example of Ukraine is a prime example. I mean, I saw the most like neoliberal people as soon as everything went down being like, we should nuke Russia. I'm like, whoa. What are you actually talking about? Or like I've seen people like kind of the same people in these comments like, oh, we need to grab some of these Russians and lynch them in the middle. I'm like, yeah, y'all are not much different from the people who were lynching Black and brown people, primarily Black people, and putting it on postcards and sending it to family members not even 50 years ago. So, I don't know, like save all the tone policing in the comments for somebody else. The reality of it is that we are making jokes about what could have happened, but what didn't happen was that. Why? Because at the end of the day, whiteness gets to do whatever it wants in this nation. So you're going to tone police me who had to watch somebody try to overthrow the entire government and then go around harassing and trying to decimate my people. Like, yeah, miss me with that one.
Listen, okay, I love it here, Fred. Oh, company. Yes, no, absolutely. What is if there's anything we haven't touched on, Fred, what do you want to tell the people before you get out of here tonight?
Before I dip, I want to say don't support the Oscars. What else? You should all watch Exterminate the Brutes by Raoul Peck. Those of you, especially those talking about violence, you'll have a better understanding of how the racial construct was invented for capitalistic purposes, but also a really good lens into how depraved and violent people were and have been and still are to keep this country running as it does. So those are the two things I'll say. Raoul Peck, exterminate all the brutes. Don't watch the Oscars.
Give these people all your socials, Fred. You churn out the best content. Please give them your socials so they can find you.
Yeah, some of you can follow me. The ones that I'm at Fred T. Joseph. I'm primarily on Instagram and Twitter. I'll be messing around with TikTok now. But yeah, if you were talking all that, don't be violent, please don't follow me. I don't have time for that. I have enough.
Thank you so much, Fred. And we have to kick it soon.
Absolutely.
I bought your book on Amazon right now, so I look forward to reading it.
Yeah, I'm gonna check it out too.
Yeah, if any of you read it, if any of you read it, I would love to come back and us like chat about toxic masculinity, things like that, as an informed group and whatnot. So
that'd be great.
Thank you, Fred.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.